the Lizard King, Mr. Mojo Rison, an American poet buried in Paris at the much too young age of 27 years old. He was a sex symbol, an artist, a deeply troubled human being. The Doors frontman, Jim Morrison, is one of the most notorious and intriguing figures of rock and roll history. I love The Doors, and I've read up a lot about Jim's notorious moments and his life in general. I'd like to think his short life has a lot to say about American society, particularly in the early 70s. I think what makes Jim so fascinating is his unique combination of notoriety, his experience of personal tragedy, and his outlook on human nature. One thing that most people don't expect from someone classified as a rock star is genius level IQ. One thing they expect, however, is controversy. With a reported IQ of 149, Jim Morrison was considered a genius, but this little known fact is often overshadowed by the number of notorious. Inducing riots at his concerts was not unheard of. One particularly wild incident was when Morrison was arrested literally on stage at his concert in New Haven, Connecticut. After being maced by a cop who didn't recognize him backstage for making out with a female fan, Morrison was very stirred up on stage. He began insulting cops while performing, causing the audience to riot and leading to his arrest on stage. Other onstage antics include situations in which Morrison actively provoked his audience, challenging the reason for even being at the concert. He always sought to make people uncomfortable and question themselves, which frequently caused unrest and even violence. Someone so clearly anti-authoritarian and willing to go against the grain of society often has troubled roots. Jim Morrison's struggle with substance abuse was a personal issue made publicly known. Many people who knew Jim personally comment on the fact that he never wanted the fame, and it is in fact the fame itself that drove him toward resulted in his untimely death. He was actually a very shy person, despite the wild spirit he exuded on stage, which was often something fueled by alcohol and drugs, not his personality. When touring in Amsterdam with Jefferson Airplane, both bands were offered a plethora of substances from their fans. According to his bandmates, Jim consumed literally all of them prior to their concert. This clearly had adverse effects on his ability to remain coherent, and he ended up collapsing on stage in front of the audience and his bandmates, who then had to continue the concert without their singer. Not unsurpassed by Jim's notoriety and personal struggles, however, was his philosophical outlook on the world. At heart, Jim was a poet, and he had always been a poet. He was inspired by the works of William Blake and Aldous Huxley in particular. The band's name, The Doors, was in fact influenced by the work of Aldous Huxley titled The Doors of Perception. Jim often spoke of the ways in which people were tricked by their senses and the necessity of awakening the mind fully. This was part of his motivation to make people around him uncomfortable, to challenge them. He wanted people to question their surroundings and not become complacent with themselves. And he often provoked them to get them to think. Jim Morrison was at the same time a train wreck, an illusory being, and a shy, timid person. Jim remains one of the most notorious people in rock history, but he was also a shy, troubled poet and philosopher. These things combined make him one of the most interesting people in rock and roll. I think that Jim Morrison, flawed as he was, had a lot of ideas we could all use a bit more influence from. He inspired people to challenge authority, to question the norm, to embrace and therefore free yourself of fear. I would like to close by quoting Jim. Expose yourself to your deepest fear. After that, fear has no power, and the fear of freedom shrinks and vanishes. You are free.